Well, our project concerns the virtues and vices of leadership in liberal democracies. Evaluations of the character of politicians have become increasingly important in campaigns, elections, and governing. Voters care a lot and care increasingly about the character traits of their political leaders. Yet we know very little about the subject, very little. We know very little about the civic virtues of liberal democratic leadership by which our politicians ought to be judged. Our project proposes to draw upon political theory, virtue ethics, social and cognitive psychology, and organizational psychology to identify key leadership virtues, to investigate their psychological structure and dynamics, to explore their origins in pre-career and career learning, and to examine their consequences. So in sum, the civic virtues of democratic leadership in liberal democracies are character traits, motivations and skills that help to promote and preserve liberal democratic regimes. Character traits being a way of looking at virtues that's consistent with virtue ethics. Well, we present in our new Science of Virtues research proposal a general preliminary inventory of civic leadership virtues inspired by Aristotle and by James Madison and by John Stuart Mill. We expect to revise the inventory as we pursue our research, but we'll begin our analyses with those virtues from the inventory for which we have the best qualitative and quantitative data. These are ambition, integrity, respecting rules of the game, practical wisdom, pursuing the general interest, excellence in deliberation, open-mindedness, and then attentiveness to public opinion and group representation, and empathy and sympathy for the public. So these materials provide the basis for unpacking the psychological structure and dynamics of the virtue of ambition and the vice. And we'll want to know whether the virtue and the vice are intertwined, just to give you some examples of the kinds of things we think we'll investigate. We want to know whether the virtue and the vice are intertwined, or whether they're distinct dimensions. We'll want to know how these core dispositions and needs are related to other orientations, like Machiavellianism, a sense of duty and public service, whether there's a package of orientations associated with the core. But from the perspective of good government, political ambition has an admirable form, which is the desire to achieve high office primarily to benefit citizens through policies and institutional reforms. And of course, it has an undesirable form, which is seeking high office primarily to benefit oneself. These two contending orientations, the virtue and the vice, are embedded in motivations for achievement, power, and status. We hypothesize that very few virtues are learned, civic virtues of the kind we're talking about, are learned first in Parliament. And ambition looks very much like a character trait with origins in pre-career learning. And here we want to know what is the effect of length of service on in leadership positions on ambition? Does it undermine the virtue? Does it strengthen the vice? Does ambition fade with time at the top? With regard to consequences, we're interested in questions such as, are the most ambitious ministers those whose work is ultimately recognized as most successful? To what extent does ambition undermine respect for Parliament? And what is its role in accountability? Does it undermine respect for accountability and representation? What's the relationship between ambition and support for constitutional rules of the game and for paying attention to public opinion?